Hi, and welcome to a special edition of State of Tel Aviv and Beyond. We'll be publishing this podcast in a series of 3 episodes over the next few days. The issue? Piers Morgan and his show, Uncensored. Piers Morgan is a global media celebrity who has cultivated an image of being a public affairs expert. He's wildly successful in terms of reach and numbers. On his YouTube channel homepage, he describes his show as, quote, the global arena for fearless debate, bold opinions, and major interviews, close quote. Others, however, see the man and his work differently. Both Piers Morgan and his YouTube show, Uncensored, have attracted more attention than usual in recent weeks. And that is primarily due to the manner in which he covers Israel, the Middle East, and related issues. So we're diving in. So in the next 3 episodes of State of Tel Aviv and Beyond, I will be presenting interviews with 5 individuals curated for very particular reasons. Each one has had an encounter with Piers Morgan and or his producers. For the record, I did invite Piers Morgan to participate in an interview with me for this series twice. The only way I know how to reach him and his staff is on X. I posted 2 invitations, both of which went unanswered. The door, of course, is always open, should he or one of his people wish to reply. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Jonathan Conricus is a brilliant communicator, and he's everywhere, on television, speaking, writing, talking. He has a gift for distilling complexity and making it understandable and accessible. That's Olympic gold when you're dealing with the Middle East. Conricus has an extraordinary background professionally, and he has also been a repeat guest on Uncensored, appearing as recently as 1 week ago. Why does he go on Uncensored? We get into it all. Conricus' most recent appearance on Piers' show was alongside a hard-baked anti-Semite, Anna Kasparian. And even Piers Morgan acknowledged on X after the show that things got a little out of hand. He offered what I thought, frankly, was a feeble explanation, saying, gee, I just couldn't get her to shut up. I tried, but... And I say, seriously, Piers, you are the master of shutting people down. And you always, of course, have the option of cutting the mic. Conricus and I discussed that debacle and more at length. It's an amazing chat. The bottom line which I put to him is, why have you participated so frequently on the show, and will you continue to do so? Tune in for the answer. Thursday, June 26, 5:15, Jonathan Conricus. Lovely to see you. How are you today?
I'm well. Happy to be returning to what we call normal life in Israel. Traffic, schools, commerce, and looking forward to what the future will bring, and happy to be here with you again. No restrictions in terms of the Homefront Command, and actually a little bit excited about where this is going.
Excited. Give me just a snapshot, because we're focusing on, of course, media coverage in particular, what's been going on the Piers Morgan show lately. But just give me a little taste. Excited, how so?
I think we witnessed a watershed moment in the history of the Middle East. Israel positioned itself in the driving seat for the first time really in 25 years, and I think achieved quite tremendous accomplishments, which, if we're smart and a little bit lucky, can really change the trajectory of battles and tensions, but really the trajectory of the Middle East in a positive way. So I am hopeful about the future.
And I'm dying to talk to you about that at length, and maybe we will do so in the next few days, because I agree there are so many developments that, managed well, could really be life-changing, not just for the region, but I think for the world. And I think that what happened over the last 10 days or so here is one of the more significant geopolitical developments in the last 50 years. We're here to talk about something a little different than we usually do today, and that is media coverage of the conflict to date. But not just any media coverage. We're really going to focus on the Piers Morgan show, Uncensored, which draws millions of viewers online every time he broadcasts. It's an independent show. He owns it. He runs it. He decides who he's going to have on. And Piers Morgan, of course, comes from the tabloid tradition of Fleet Street journalism. And so he has a nose for, a taste for the fiery, the combative, the sometimes salacious and controversial, which is fine. But he has now applied that consistently to a rather serious topic. He has been applying his style of journalism to the conflict in the Middle East. So Hamas, Israel, Iran. And he likes, it seems, to bring together people who hold wildly divergent views. And you, of course, are one of his frequent guests and had the pleasure in recent days of appearing on his show with others, including Anna Kasparian. Now, I just want to pause for a moment and say that Anna Kasparian, Andrew Tate, Dan Bilzerian, Chunk Wager, I think I pronounced his name correctly, and there are others. What Piers Morgan has done consistently since October 7th is platformed individuals who are so virulently anti-Semitic and anti-Israel, and he puts them on with people like you. Okay, so we'll get to why you go on and, you have a choice and all that. But it really came to a head last week when he had Minister Amichai Chikli on. He is a senior minister with the Israeli government, Minister of Diaspora Affairs. And Minister Shikli mentioned or said to Piers that he considered him to be anti-Semitic.
He tweeted it first, yeah.
And so Piers challenged him, like, what have I ever done? What have I done? What have I said? Give you one example. Okay, so first of all, it's turning into a bit of a, back alley kind of put up your dukes thing. And Shikli said, look, Piers, you have become a platform for the most vitriolic anti-Semites in the world. And you put them on and you let them speak to millions of people. As someone who has appeared on Piers Morgan's show repeatedly, we'll get to why you do it. What do you think about the allegation or the reality that he platforms these virulent anti-Semites? What do you make of it?
Yeah, what I make of it is that it's true. I think it's objectively very difficult to defeat that argument because it's all out there. You just have to go through the videos and see the type of people that he has on, what they're saying, the level of toxicity, hatred, and ignorance and lack of any style or class or substance. But it's a combination of that, and the common denominator is that there are lots and lots of people who fall into even the most stringent definition of an anti-Semite, not the broadest definition. People that really are filled with hatred, that are blinded by their hatred, and it really consumes them. It really, you can see that it clouds their judgment, and it's the cookie cutter, the ultimate cookie cutter of their lives, of their brain, and everything goes through that filter, and it really gets the better of them. And there's a lot of examples, some of them you said, but the bottom line is that yes, over the last, I'd say 2 years or so, I've seen a tremendous amount of vitriol and incitement against Jews, against Israel, against the Israeli government, against the Israeli people, against the IDF, and things that are, I think, way, way beyond journalism and even debate. So what Minister Shikli tried to do, and of course, as you said, Piers, he was very combative. Piers had one singular mission with that entire escapade, that entire interview. It was to make Minister Shikli look bad. It was to make him look as if he had made an unfounded allegation, and to prove to viewers, which I'm sure he felt pretty successful in doing, that he was in fact not an anti-Semite and that he was being accused of being something that he isn't by an Israeli minister who many people should criticize and feel that they don't support. And I think that was his aim. And that's unfortunate because at the essence of it, I think the criticism that Minister Shikli has is correct. I don't know, because I haven't had the option to look into the soul and the heart and mind and the thinking of Piers. I don't know what he really believes in, but I do know that his show platforms some of the most vile, rude, obnoxious, and disgusting haters that I've seen and had the misfortunes of being in the same cyber domain as, and that's irrefutable.
So, and I want to get into the weeds of that in just a moment. Piers is a professional host, that there's a way to carry on, but obviously different strokes for different folks.
You have to distinguish between, an anchor and a presenter at the network and an entertainer. These are two different things. And I think that Piers today with Uncensored, he is much closer to an entertainer than he is to someone who delivers information and opinion or manages debate and promotes free thinking. I think is much more in the realm of entertainment. And as you said, it's a very successful platform. Lots of people watch every episode, millions of people watch, and it does shape conversation. So, but I think it's much closer to entertainment, and sometimes, mud wrestling than it is intellectual debate that, gives people the opportunity to make an argument, listen to others, and maybe allow people to change their perspective as a result of what they hear.
I totally agree, and I call him the Jerry Springer of geopolitics. But having said that, you and I may look at it that way, but there are millions of people around the world who actually think that Piers Morgan is delivering the facts. He's delivering information. He's delivering intellectual fodder. He's stripping away all the crap that the Zionist-controlled media spews and giving you the straight goods straight from the horse's mouths. So whereas we may see him in that way, I think that many others see him as a purveyor of unvarnished truths. So just park that, because I wanted to stick with Shikli and go to your Kasparian incident, because Piers Morgan has come under fire for many things. As you mentioned, some have said that he's an anti-Semite, some have said he's a misogynist, he treats women differently, he treats pro-Israel people differently. And like you, I actually am not overly interested in psychoanalyzing him. What I am interested in is what goes on his, whether it's a news program, talk show, or entertainment hour. And there are some concerning issues that he seems very determined, aggressively determined to refute. One being, of course, he's an anti-Semite, and the way in which he hosted Shikli. So whatever he may or may not think of Shikli or the coalition government or Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think that the way in which even an entertainer interacts with a senior government official, there has to be some floor. And I don't think there was a floor when he had Shikli on. And then, it's interesting because he clearly...
I'll add some perspective to that. I've personally seen and been in the studio when he has interviewed two former Israeli prime ministers, Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert. And I can tell you that those interviews were some of the most softball interviews that I've seen, definitely on Piers' channel. And it was all about giving them the platform to grandstand and smear the state of Israel, its military, its political leadership, and its decision-making. And no hard questions, no questions, that would in any way challenge the motives of those two gentlemen. And why they were saying what they were saying. They made extremely harsh allegations. Piers was happy to take those allegations and amplify them tremendously and use that continuously in his rhetoric, including against me and against other Israelis when we were debating, or other pro-Israelis when we were debating. And you could see that when he wants to, he knows, of course, to conduct himself in a respectful, professional demeanor. And I agree with you. Yeah, he should have been. He should have had the same professional demeanor when it came to Minister Shikli. He didn't, because he was there in a very crude mission to show the world, show his viewers that Shikli had made a false allegation, and to make him look very, very bad. And he didn't hold any punches, or maybe a little bit, and he was very aggressive. I haven't seen him as aggressive. I've seen him aggressive against Natasha Hausdorff. I've seen him perhaps aggressive when he was personally affronted by panelists who simply, refused to shut up and were screaming and misbehaving. I've seen him raise his voice a bit, but his aggressiveness, his toxicity towards Shikli, I think was quite unique. And, okay, that's his choice. He isn't in the business of diplomacy or etiquette. He's in the business of generating clicks and getting viewer attention. That's his business. That's what pays the bills. I would want for him and everybody else to be fair and professional. And if you treat one current sitting politician in a certain way, then that should be the standard for others and not treat them differently. And I regret that was the situation. And as I said, you can see that it wasn't something specifically against Israelis, because when Israelis were on and they were willing to smear the Israeli government and say horrible and untrue things about the IDF, they got the most comfortable and supportive platform that you could ever wish for.
And it was interesting because in the days since, I've noticed there have been one or two, and I'll certainly post them in the show notes for this episode, followers in Israel who say, something like, hey, Piers, we can't stand him either, thanks for, doing what you did. And Piers Morgan takes the trouble to repost and tag Shikli and say, wow, I didn't know so many of your countrymen hated you so much. It even makes Jerry Springer look.
It's pretty cheap. It's
pretty lowbrow and pretty. But let's go to the Piers kind of. He gets people on, he gets them yelling, but he holds the mic. He controls the room. And you were on one of many times, but most recently, a few days ago, with Anna Kasparian. She is an outspoken, wildly vitriolic, anti-Semite and anti-Israel individual, American, and Piers platforms her frequently. And there were 4 of you on, but I know that there was in particular a kind of exchange between you and Anna in which she just was on fire and yelling and hollering and saying the ugliest, most unsubstantiated things. And Piers let her. He just let her go. And when he was challenged after, he said, I tried. This is on Twitter.
I tried to control her, yeah.
Control her. And I'm like, pardon my French, but bullshit, Piers Morgan, because you control the mic. You can cut the mic. You have cut off.
And he's done it in the past, by the way. He has cut people off.
He is the master of cutting people off. And all of a sudden, with beautiful Anna Kasparian spewing the sewage that came out of her mouth, he can't cut her off?
If it was a one-off occurrence, then, you could say, okay, stuff happens, poor judgment, he got carried away in the moment. We all make mistakes, and that happens. Whoever does makes mistakes, right? But it wasn't a one-off, and I've been personally in quite a lot of debates. There's another hate-consumed lady that I forgot her name. She was so unimpressive, and she was, extremely childish and immature, and like some frustrated teenage girl making all of these faces, and of course, as usual, personal attacks against me and smears and everything. And very poor control. And I've had other debates as well where my subjective feeling is that those that the Israel haters and the anti-Semites, that he gives them a platform, that they're not only allowed to say the most atrocious and horrible things, but he doesn't hold them back. And he really creates that environment. And I'm not one to look back and cry about things and complain. But when I see, in hindsight, I see a certain pattern here. And I think the pattern really substantiates, again, based on actions. I don't know what goes on in his heart. But based on the actions, I would say that the type of rhetoric that he allows on his platform, I think is reckless. I think is wrong. It's unfounded. It's despicable. And I think, I tried to make that point, and of course he cut me off, that there's also media responsibility, and people like him and other men, it's mostly men, but also women like Candace Owens. I mean, we've seen a lot of hateful women as well, really consumed by hate, but usually the platform owners are men. I think there's responsibility. And I made the point that, and he actually spoke about it himself, that, the anti-Semitic attacks or the anti-Israeli attacks that occurred in the US a few weeks ago, killing of 2 Israeli diplomats in DC, and then the attack on the pro-Israeli rally in Colorado. There was a clear line here, a clear logical connection between stuff being said online and in news media, and then some crazy, hate-filled terrorists or deranged people taking matters into their own hands and turning violent against civilians who had nothing to do with the conflict, or who shouldn't, of course, be targeted. And I think that there is a responsibility that isn't acknowledged, where currently in this media environment, it is totally okay to smear the Jewish state, its leadership, its military, and apply absolutely impossible standards of conduct and judgment to Israel, as opposed to all other countries and all other militaries in the world. And Piers definitely does that. I think he is dishonest in his analysis of the situation. I think he is dishonest in his I would say almost, it's ridiculous, his insistence on the whole issue of why isn't media allowed into Gaza. I have invited him 3 times now on air, and I've told him, you want to come to Gaza? I'll take you to Gaza, and you'll be able to report and do whatever you want there, within the restrictions of security, of course. And he hasn't followed up on it, but he keeps bringing that up whenever he or someone other who's opposed to Israel on his program runs out of intellectual runway in an argument. And I make a point, well, we don't know because Israel isn't allowing the BBC in, as if that would be helpful.
Yeah, and he was kind of, I think, going at that one again last night. But this is really interesting because what you've just done, and in that really interesting commentary you just gave, you referred to him as news media. You referred to the responsibility that inherently attaches to him in doing these kinds of shows, in discussing these sorts of issues. On the other hand, we spoke about him earlier as an entertainer. My first appearance as a litigator in court, the judge said to me, counsel, you can't suck and blow. And I think that when you're dealing with such significant matters and issues, you can't suck and blow. Are you tap dancing with a top hat and a cane? Or are you purporting to actually seriously analyze, consider, and present these issues? And this really takes me to the heart of it. God, it takes us a long time, but it's also worth it. The journey is fantastic. And that is you, Jonathan Conricus, in my view, one of the most outstanding commentators currently out there speaking to the military, security, social, less so political, that I go to other people for, but to the really important issues that need to be understood. And they're so complex. You not only are articulate, but you've also been there. You've been in the battlefield. You've been in the tunnels. You have been the guy behind the microphone in the IDF spokesperson's unit having to dance on a head of a pin. The combination of life experience that you have is extraordinary. You've also, of course, worked on secondment, I believe, at the United Nations with the Israeli delegation. So, you've used your years well. And to take someone like you and put you on a panel with someone like Anna Kasparian, in and of itself, to me, signals an inherent disrespect. It's either massive stupidity, and I don't think Piers Morgan is massively stupid, but you are not Anna Kasparian's peer. She is not your peer. He does this repeatedly with quality people. He puts Natasha Hausdorff on with comic Dave Smith, who, like, for the life of me, I don't get what this is about. It happens over and over. And the inequity, the disparity between the quality of the people, when I say quality, I mean ethically, in terms of decorum, in terms of experience, in terms of education. He always seems to take the pro-Israel / Jewish person and team them up with Anna Kasparian. You go on the show, and you and I have had these discussions in private, and I want you to help not just me, but others understand why you do it, because clearly you see some value in doing it. To me, every time a Jonathan Conricus participates, you legitimize not just the platform, but the individuals on the platform. You raise them up to your level. I'm not saying you actually raise them up to your level, but you just being there raises them, elevates them, legitimizes them to a degree. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, so one of my comments after the last episode with this Anna person was that I texted the bookers and I said, this isn't serious. We've done this now a few times. Sometimes we've had more or less interesting debates. I remember debating Mehdi Hassan, who I think is very questionable in terms of what he stands for, who funds him, what he really is about and what he believes in. Is it the Muslim Brotherhood? Is it to subvert Western society and turn it into basically a Muslim state? Is it to advance the policies of Qatar? Or is it just to undermine Israel's legitimacy? I don't know what it is, but at least this is a guy who, at least, to a certain extent, has a minimum level of knowledge and involvement. Again, his motivations and finances are very questionable, but at least this is a guy who speaks more or less coherently and follows events and can sometimes make an argument that makes some warped, but makes some kind of sense. And I don't mind debating people who have a different perspective. Yesterday, I did a debate on Mario Naufal's X site with a guy who's an American former weapons expert. I think he also has some serious issues related to Israel, but he's been pretty careful not to expose them very bluntly. And I said, fine, the guy has a checkered past, but it may be an interesting situation. And it was pretty much okay. So far, it's more than 2.5 million views just on the X page, a few 100,000 on YouTube as well. And we more or less had a debate. No screaming at all, actually. No significant interruptions. And, he delivered his messages. I said what I believe. And people were able to choose what to believe. And that it hasn't been the case in the last debates or so-called debates with Piers. And I think you have a very solid point. I feel on the flip side of it, I think that these are the people who are the standard bearers for the anti-Israeli camp, the so-called pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian, or however they want to brand themselves. And to be frank, some of them are really low-level people. Some of them have no intellectual standing, no real knowledge or experience, research, or real invested time and anything that resembles, expertise in the topic. They're entertainers, they're comics, they're podcast hosts, and so-called influencers. But these are the standard bearers of those people, and usually they behave very poorly. Usually it's a lot of personal attacks, ad hominem attacks against me or other people, which usually is, indicative of someone who doesn't have a lot of substance to say when you attack the person in front of you, without, addressing the content of what that person is saying. And I feel a bit, it's a sad state for them to be in. I would happily debate Hassam Zumlot, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK. If he'd be willing to debate me one-on-one on Piers, more than happy to, because that would be interesting. That would be somewhat of a peer and someone that has relevant knowledge. And I've said so to the bookers at Piers, but sadly lately it's been very, very cheap and not high level. And I can tell you that I've told them that, if you don't match me up with serious people, and if you don't establish ground rules that, mute people who cross the line so bluntly and really just make the whole episode unbearable and just, moot in terms of time wasted, because you can't listen to a bunch of people talking over each other, especially when one is screaming and lots of insults. That doesn't make any sense. It's just mud wrestling, and that's not my thing. And I've told them that, if you pair me up with someone relevant, I'll consider coming back on the show. If you don't, all the best to you. Good luck. And I will find other venues to defend the state of Israel and the Jewish people and everything that's happening. And there's lots of other platforms. So I think you have a point. I hope that, they'll fix it. Otherwise, I think eventually people will vote with their fingers and decide not to consume the content, because it will be a bunch of crazy people, low-level crazy people with no substance, no standing, no expertise on a topic that are maybe interesting entertainers, but not a lot more than that.
And I think that one of the sad inferences I'm going to draw from what you've just said is it is low-level entertainment of this type, sort of masquerading as serious public discussion, debate, that is ruling the public discourse these days. I mean, it is the Piers Morgans. Mario Nawfal, I'm delighted to hear that you had a good experience on that show. Regrettably, I had a much different one when he was starting out. And I'm sitting here trying to think of, aside from some mainstream media, independent shows that are really kind of top quality with the reach that a Piers Morgan has. And that's the issue. People like you go on because you're hoping to reach, and you're hoping that in all of this storm and drang that maybe there are people out there who actually listen and hear you, and you move the needle a bit, right? That has, you want to move the needle, you want to make an impact, you're in this for serious reasons. And I guess I just throw out the question, not for you to answer, but does a platform like Piers Morgan's Uncensored really lend itself to that sort of intellectual openness movement, or is it about just kind of watching everybody kind of put on their brass knuckles and bash it out?
It's a matter of decision. It's not lack of interest or being sloppy. It's a matter of a strategic decision that I think he has to make, he and the people who help him run the show, where they want to take the show, where they want to charge it. I think what I've seen online, the level of pushback from Jewish thought leaders and Israelis is, much along the lines of what you're saying. This isn't a show that we should continue to lend legitimacy to, and I think that's pretty much correct. And then he'll have to decide. I mean, he may be totally okay with having a one-sided shout fest, and he may not even need the Jews as window dressing or fig leaves. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's a decision that he will have to make, and the only option that I and many others have is, do we or do we not want to participate? Do we think that it is worth the time, the headache, the unsavory people that we have to sit and listen to and be in the same cyberspace as? And eventually, at the end of the day, I think people make their own decisions. Piers will make his decisions, and participants will make their decisions. We can regret and, complain, but that's the battlefield. I wish it was, nice and civil, and we could sit down and talk and actually listen to each other, and, Palestinians and others, we could sit down and have a conversation and debate, but that isn't where we are. That's not the media, that is not the environment, those are not the accepted norms. And unfortunately, we have to deal with it, and we have to fight the battle where it's being fought, not where it isn't being fought.
I just hope that he will have a quiet moment and choose to use the tremendous power that he has in the world today and maybe just do a slight turn back into an environment that I would like to watch and see. I think he has the potential to do a lot of good. I think he could, and his bookers could easily find peers of yours who are on the quote other side, who would make
I don't
for
know
a
if they
fact.
can. I don't know. Maybe they can't. I've asked them that many times, and I said, why don't you find serious people for me to debate? I mean, there are serious people, but they haven't been able to book them. I don't know what the reason is. That type of debate, where there are ground rules, where there's time limits, where there's a certain structure to it, I think that can be meaningful, and I'm open to it. Open to listening and open to trying to get my points across.
All right. Well, Piers, if you're listening, we're happy to have a chat and give you some pointers. Jonathan Conricus, as always, love talking to you. Appreciate this. I think that we're in a moment not just of tremendous, instability in so many ways in the world, but we've also got a kind of effed up media world, right? The way in which information is shared, disseminated, consumed. And this is part of the problem. So I'm just thought it would be a good opportunity, particularly now, to try to make some sense of some of it. Thank you so much for being with me as always. Pleasure to see you. And let's hope for a peaceful weekend.
Let's do that, and let's keep in mind that we will overcome this as well. We've been through worse, and this too shall pass.
Amen to that. Thank you. Okay, now we turn to Israeli Minister of Diaspora Affairs, Amichai Chikli, who appeared recently on Uncensored and had an unfortunate experience. Minister Shikli is in the public eye and subject to constant criticism. Whatever one's personal views of the man or his politics, his encounter with Piers Morgan last week on Uncensored was troubling, in my view. I would have expected that a senior cabinet minister of any government would be accorded a base level of respect. You can hate Shikli or love him, but he should be treated politely. It's a really interesting discussion with Minister Shikli. It's fascinating and candid. Have a listen. Friday, June 27th, 10 in the morning in Israel. Minister Amichai Chikli, thank you for joining State of Tel Aviv.
Shalom, Vivian. My pleasure.
It's been quite a week in so many ways, but surprisingly, we're not going to talk about what's been going on in Iran directly. I know, crazy, right? We have other things on our mind. What I want to talk to you about is, in general, media coverage of the war and Israel and the way in which Israel has conducted itself. But I want to do this by focusing on what has become a bit of a global media event. And that is the Piers Morgan show, Uncensored. He platforms all manner of people on his show.
Mhm.
And as you pointed out in a tweet in June, a week or two ago, he seems to have a thing for putting on Holocaust deniers and really hardcore anti-Semites. But why he has become important is because his platform is so big, it is watched by so many people around the world, and they feel that they are getting accurate information. And the question becomes, is this just low-grade Jerry Springer type entertainment about really serious issues? Or is Piers Morgan kind of a very significant interlocutor on the geopolitics of our time? And then we get into how he may or may not treat guests of different opinions and backgrounds. So let's start with your tweet, early June. Tell us what you tweeted at Piers Morgan directly.
So first, you can read the tweet, but
Oh, I will do that, and I will include it also in the show notes, but I want you to tell
okay,
us.
no problem, no problem. I've been following the show since the beginning of the war because, as you mentioned, it became a main stage for the debate regarding Israel, and I thought that this was relatively fair with Israel, at least at the beginning. But then when I continued watching, I was very surprised to see people like Dan Bilzerian on the show, and I was wondering, why would he bring this I don't know how to describe Dan Balzerian, but zero professional background that is relevant for the debate. The only thing that Dan Balzerian is doing that is somehow relevant to this debate is tweeting and posting the most anti-Semite blood libels that you can imagine. Speaking about the Talmudic Jew as the cancer of America, this is Holocaust denying, uh, crazy stuff. And you're saying, why do you bring this guy to your show? Does he know something? He learned something regarding Israel, the Middle East? Was he a reporter? Does he have, I don't know, maybe family? Something. Zero. And you know, that Balzerian himself is a myth, because there's a question: how come this guy who comes from, I don't know, poker and entertainment, very specific kind of entertainment, how does he became all of a sudden so involved in Jews promoting Islam? We have no problem with Islam. How did it happen? And I don't know the answer. But why should Pierce take this kind of a person and bring him to his show? Now with Balzerian, you can say at least Pierce was challenging him, not like he was challenging a Pasha Hausdorff or a minister from the Israeli government, but he was challenging him. But it was not alone. It was not just Balzerian. It was also Candace Owens. So Candace Owens, people, especially in Israel, they don't really know her, and they don't understand how a big deal is to give her a stage. Candace Owens is today, alongside Barry Cooper, the two main Holocaust deniers worldwide. Why would he do such a thing? Come on. If Holocaust denying is not enough, she's also recycling the most vile anti-Semite conspiracy theory, saying that, for instance, Israelis were informed before the attack on 9/11, and they didn't let their friends to know about it, and they evacuated a building that was nearby of a company. You know, it's old anti-Semite myth, absolute lie, and forget the fact that hundreds of Jews were killed that day, between 300 to 400 Jews. Forgot the fact that the first casualty was Dan Levin, a former Israeli officer in Sayeret Matkal, who was fighting with the terrorists on the plane. He was the first victim of 9/11. But she's trying to portray it as if Israelis were responsible for the most horrific terror attack on American soil in the last century. So this is Candace Owens, and he is giving her the platform, not like Balzerian once, 6 times in the past year and a half, 6 times. And that's a lot. That's a lot. And by doing that is giving her legitimacy. By doing it is obviously is exposing her to millions of people. And I wrote to him yesterday, because during the conversation we had, I barely managed to speak. It was extremely difficult to speak. It was very, very hostile. And I wrote to him on Twitter with a thread with all the examples, and saying, when you host a Holocaust denier and conspiracy theorist, and you don't challenge them for what they've been saying on huge platforms, you just give them the stage and you treat them respectfully. By doing it, I see it as a form of anti-Semitism.
Yes, I've been following your back and forth with Piers Morgan carefully. Remind us, did he respond to that particular comment?
Yes, to his favor, I can say he's always responding. He likes the clickbait, he likes the discussion, but his response was to say that I'm a useless minister and I'm hated in Israel. I saw he got a lot of support from Israel far left, and it's not a big surprise.
Yeah, I remember that tweet was, it's not right in front of me now, but wow, I didn't know how hated you are in your own country. I mean, which is completely not the point. Okay, so I want to just back up a little and unpack this because you began your critique shortly after Natasha Hausdorff had been
Yeah, that was the
savaged.
trigger. I saw it and I said, okay, something is wrong. Something is wrong. She was so polite. She articulated, and he wouldn't let her speak for more than 10 seconds in a row. It was, I said, so, where does this hostility comes from?
So I want to say two things very clearly because I come at this, frankly, as a media professional. I've been working in the field as a lawyer, as a journalist, as an editor for over 40 years. I watched the industry change significantly. Piers Morgan comes from what we call the yellow journalism school, tabloid
Mm,
journalism on Fleet Street. That's
yeah.
his background. He clearly thrives on it. I'm all for debate. I'm all for controversy, but there's a floor. And as you say, when Natasha Hausdorff was on, I think he savaged her. I think he showed her zero respect. What I don't want to get into is his head. I don't care if he's a misogynist. I don't care if he's an anti Semite. What I do care about is who he platforms and how he platforms. And the only reason I care is because he's got this huge audience globally. And these are issues about which I care very deeply. And I
Mhm.
think they should be handled intelligently. So he has Natasha Hausdorff on. You and I both know her. She's beyond brilliant and every other
She is
attribute.
amazing. She
She's
is
incredible.
really amazing.
I would have lost my stuff, but she kept her so English, kept her cool.
Um,
He puts this gold. You can hate her, you can disagree with her, but she's got a powerful intellect and a lot of knowledge. She is a serious interlocutor on the issues. She's an international human rights lawyer. She's the real deal. He puts her on with Comic Dave Smith. Comic Dave Smith is his new go-to guy. First, you raise the point, and well taken, when you put Candace Owens on repeatedly, you legitimize the point of view she brings. When you take someone like Natasha Hausdorff and put her on with Comic Dave Smith, you elevate, what is this? He's on with her. Could you not find a peer? Just by doing that, he denigrates her and elevates this comedian.
This is a serious problem.
Now, I want to go back, Minister, to your appearance because I think it was a very important moment. Each case I'm looking at is so significant. You went on, and frankly, I thought you handled yourself very coolly. I would put you in the Natasha Hausdorff category of keeping your powder dry, which
Yeah.
is not easy to do. Piers Morgan had you on for one reason. He had you on because he wanted to challenge you to tell him, okay, name one time or one thing I've said that's been anti-Semitic. And it was like he wanted, I'm not sure what he was looking for. Your point was, look who you platform, as you've been telling us, correct? Why do you platform these people and allow them to speak very freely without interruption to spew the most hateful distortions of fact and history? And it just went downhill from there with him constantly yelling over you and you trying to speak. Is that a fair, you were the one in the hot seat. I just get to watch it now after the fact. How did you feel in the moment? What was the experience like for you?
Look, I was surprised because before we had the conversation, I said, look, we saw your interview with Natasha. So we hope that we will have a chance to have a serious conversation. Second, when we discussed the topics, we said main topic will be Iran. I think it's the first time in the last 2 years that he has a minister on his show, minister that is now on his role, not former. So that is, I think, I thought is like he said, or his team said, that it's going to be a serious interview. And also, I watched an interview of him with Danny Danon from a week before, and I certainly was respectful for Danny. And I said, maybe he wants to correct things. it was clear to me that he's going to ask about the post, anti-Semitism, obviously. Maybe it will be 10% of the conversation, okay? It was clear to me that he's going to ask about Gaza because he was obsessed about the issue in the past months. And I was trying to also discuss this topic, which was also extremely difficult. But the fact is, he wasn't speaking, he wasn't interested not in Gaza, he wasn't interested not in Iran, and he was basically, I said it was like a revenge. He wanted to yell at me, he wanted to humiliate, to hurt, and I was trying, to say, okay, maybe we can at some point move on, get into discussion on the real things. It didn't happen. I think that was interesting to see the response on his platform. People saw it, said, look, you brought a guest, you didn't let him speak, he came with serious points, you did not address them, and that's it. That was it.
Yeah, I mean, what really bothered me, and I have to admit, I spent more time than I'd cared to looking at senior government officials from other countries that he has had on and to whom he's accorded the appropriate level of respect.
Yeah.
But he had on Minister Amichai Chikli from Israel, whether you like it or not, a democratically elected government. And I felt that you were accorded no respect, no baseline respect.
Yeah.
And that also bothered.
He was actually cursing. It was like to meet someone in the street at late
Yeah,
night
no, it
that will curse.
was a knife fight with brass knuckles. It was ugly, and it was just inappropriate for someone of your station. So the question, I mean, you answered a question which was really interesting that I ask everyone I'm talking to, which was going to be, why did you go on? And you've answered that because you had done your homework. You thought this was going to be a respectful exchange. You were prepared to discuss the anti-Semitism point, but you were also ready to get into other topics. And what happened was the whole thing just kind of veered off into this crazy.
It was 100% personal. You tweeted against me.
Yeah. So I think it's safe to assume then that you won't be a repeat guest. Your appearance kind of brought so much to a head, right? It's really exposed things in a very ugly way. But again, is he a purveyor of information? Is he an interlocutor of the most important geopolitical issues of our time? What's your sense?
Look, I think first I have nothing against him on the personal level.
Yes.
I don't know him. I was just referring to issues that I thought were very important, and because of the fact that I saw this interview with Danon, and I thought maybe he wants to correct things, I decided to give it a try. I think that what he's doing very right is the ability to mix between TV and social networks on the professional side. That is, I think, something that most of the people, they don't know how to do it. And by the way, Tucker Carlson is the same. So in terms of media, these are very high professional people, maybe top worldwide. And the problem is that there is, the mechanism of social networks. Nothing sells better than hate. That is the algorithm. The more you are mad, the more you hate, the more it's viral. This is science of social platforms. And
Right.
that is also the main reason, I think, why he's bringing these people to his show. It is like WWF. People want to see blood. It is the modern Colosseum. That's what it is.
I think on that note, we're going to wrap up. I really appreciate your generosity with your time. I know it's been a terribly busy week for you. And thank you for making so much time and discussing this issue. It's important. And I
Sure.
hope you manage to find some Zen time over the weekend with your family. Shabbat Shalom. Be well.
Thanks so much.
Since Minister Shikli's appearance, Morgan has made much ado about the fact that many Israelis have written to share with him their disapproval of Minister Shikli and the government of which he is a member. And Morgan presents this criticism as something of a vindication for the way in which he treated Minister Shikli on his show. I disagree robustly. You can always find people who like or loathe a particular political figure, but this is not about approving or disapproving of this government and its policies. The issue regarding Piers Morgan, Uncensored, and more broadly, independent media is how the power is used. I encourage you to peruse the X accounts of Piers Morgan and his show Uncensored, Jonathan Conricus, Minister Shikli, Emily Schrader, Lee Kern, Ridvan Aydemir, all our guests. It's all there, and you can read and dig into what interests you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be continuing next in this series with Lee Kern, who, as we say in Hebrew, is very harif. He's insightful, thoughtful, and he takes no prisoners. Please consider supporting State of Tel Aviv and beyond with a paid subscription. It really helps. We're independent, we work hard, and the support matters. So thanks again so much for being here. Have a great day and a safe one. Until next time.
We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.